Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Seconds Out Live. The only thing unstable about me is my internet connection, it appears. Let's hope that's the only thing anyway. Delighted to be joined once again by Mr. Ayman Khan. Been a big week for him, but we'll get into all of that in a bit. Ayman, how the hell are you?
I'm really good. I'm trying to lose a stone, so I'm burning off a lot of energy. You can see I probably just jumped out the shower and just to get myself here in time to join you guys on Seconds Out
What an
Live.
image, first of all.
An image indeed. I assure you, I haven't got
Jumped out the
clothes
shower.
on. I assure you, I've got clothes on beneath just this top as well too. But I'm happy to be here on another edition of Seconds Out Live with you guys in the chat, sharing your thoughts and contributions to what has been. The dust is still settling and falling and putting the pictures in place of the jigsaw puzzle that is the heavyweight division. Danny, can't wait to talk all about it.
Yeah, in a week where Seconds Out solidified its status as the official boxing news outlet of the Dubois family, we are still talking about Joshua Dubois, what the future holds for both men. And there was some sort of press conference issue last week as well, which I'm sure we'll be talking about very, very carefully. If you don't know what we're talking about, you probably should Google it before we get to segment number 2. But yeah, we are the most interactive show on Boxing YouTube, as well as being the official channel of the Dubois. So please do give us a like. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and get your questions and comments in. We'll get through as many of those in our allotted time as we can. And before we do go to the chat for the very first time, Ayman, the thoughts, it seems a little unfair on Daniel Dubois that a lot of people are now talking far more about the loser of the fight just over a week ago than they are the victor. And I think that's because a lot of the potential opponents for Daniel Dubois' next fight, which we believe won't be until 2025, are tied up. But also, and I very much remember this is something that Bret the Hitman Hart, my childhood hero, wrote in his book, that the drama when his big match against the British Bulldog at SummerSlam 92, where 11-year-old Flex was very lucky to be a part of, the drama was around the loser of the match, not the winner. And I think the same is very much true of Joshua. He's been the establishment figure, the number one heavyweight in Britain. Maybe Tyson Fury, maybe Joshua, but Joshua for certainly a longer time. And now thoughts turn to, as Eddie Hearn confirmed over the weekend, he won't be retiring. So how and when does he come back, and who against? And what are your kind of initial thoughts on the subject?
As well too. Look, you've got to kind of discuss things from both sides of the coin here, but this is for a lot of people. Look, going into this, we knew anti-Joshua was the A side, and we knew that if Dubois was going to get to, or at least I said myself, if Dubois was going to get the victory, you'd have to manage those first kind of early rounds. But I backed Dubois to get the win. But when it came to a Dubois victory, in amongst all of the kind of pundits or the conversation, apart from maybe, well, even his corner, I think even Chisora, Don Charles had said that this is going to be a tough battle to come through, and we weren't expecting an easy fight by any means, but it was a resounding victory in the way Dubois did it. That causes shockwaves, and people can't quite get their heads around how that happened, and they put the microscope on AJ as opposed to Dubois' greatness in that stage. And we get that because we know that AJ's got the accolades, he's got the Olympic pedigree. We can't quite fathom Dubois, to be fair, still hasn't been to those sort of heights, and he's added a big step up onto the ladder to get to those heights, but he hasn't quite had the nights yet that anti-Joshua has had. So people don't quite get their heads around it. And the pundits and the people talking about the fight have had AJ far and ahead a big winner and a big favorite in this fight, which is understandable as well too. But when that happens, and when what happened at Wembley a week or so ago happens, that people are shocked. This is one of those where you're allowed to be shocked at the outcome, and you're allowed to kind of have the perplexion or the kind of or being baffled by just what went down and what Dubois was able to do. But that's what's not going to be mixed up here, is what was Dubois able to do as opposed to anti-Joshua. In terms of anti-Joshua's rebuild or what's next for him, rebuild is a strong word. And when I was speaking to Shane McGuigan, I sort of agreed with what he said, if I remember it correctly. Like, rebuild, there's no real rebuild now. It's tough fights. It's fights that you've got to go into. You've got to prove yourself now, because You've just been beaten by someone who's young and hungry and has the hunger to succeed and hunger to fight. You've got to prove and show that. And to a degree, he did show that in wanting to get up in that fight, even though he was hit by a barrage of punches. He had that mettle to want to get up off the canvas and onto his feet and to continue. But now outside the ring, you've got to show that with the way that you prepare, the way that you train, and also who you fight, who you're matched up with. And that's what's important for me now. And I want to see AJ be matched up relatively difficultly. Look, he doesn't have to go up against the toughest of competitors or contenders, or ones where he's, to be fair, in not many fights will he be like not a good favorite in the fight. But you can't go in against people who are matched accordingly, like Ngannou with respect, or someone who's not a big, heavy puncher. You have to be welcome to all contenders and all comers, and you've got to prove yourself again. And once you're in the mindset of wanting to prove yourself, you cast off any doubts about hunger, any doubts about ambition. You've shown that you're someone who wants to win a world title again. Then you start to get onto the path of winning that world title again, and rematches and things. So rematch for me isn't probably the right move now, but another good fight in the heavyweight division, or another kind of big fight in the heavyweight division, are the way that I would go right now. A Hrgovic would be a good fight for me, for example, because regardless of Hrgovic's loss to Daniel Dubois, we know, and I know, and I've shared on this Seconds Out Live beforehand, that Filip Hrgovic sustained a cut under his left eye 8 or 9 days before the fight in one of his last spars, and that kind of forced his hand to fight the way that he did fight, and he was gassed after the fifth or so, and Dubois was able to step on the gas and stop him with cuts. But Hrgovic was still there. Hrgovic didn't drop. Hrgovic didn't fall. He was there throwing bombs in return to Daniel Dubois. But it was Daniel's night on that night, not to take too much away from him. But if AJ goes in against someone like Filip Hrgovic, he's only had that one defeat. Some might contest two, and I'm someone who would actually contest two. The second being to Zhilei Zhang. I was there live for that fight. I thought Zhang did win that fight. But that aside, officially, only the one loss to Daniel Dubois. That's still a big scalp to have on your record if you're able to come through and beat Filip Hrgovic. A real good, tough test, a fight that was talked about for a long while. Don't start building back with the types of the Pulevs and the Otto Wallens of the world. You've got to go in match strong. You've got to go in match with people that are recognized in the division. Or you could do the other thing, and this would be an idea as to where Joshua's direction is going to go. It's still a big fight, and it's still commendable in the direction, but it's sort of
just to stay on the relatively safe side. Scott Winter says Zhang AJ never happened. Eddie loves his mantelpiece. Jakov Gospich said, agree Wilder would be best next option from fans' perspective. AJ has forced too many rematch clauses in his fights for fans to keep interested. Dubois deserves Usyk Fury winner next. Let me scroll down. Bear with. To quote Miranda. DB Cooper 1, let's hope the stream works right this week, chaps. I thought SO were meant to be old school pros in the YouTube game. No apostrophe in pros, DB Cooper 1. I'm sorry, I know my connection's bad, but I will not accept bad grammar. James Salter says Parker's about, but it's already happened. AJ Wilder, yeah, it's a big fight. Let's scroll more. Boo says Dubois dismantled AJ, pointless rematch. AJ can't take a punch now. Paul Anthony, I think Wilder needs a warm-up first just to see where he's at. Even his power looks suspect in his last bout. Greedax says, man streaming from his toilet. It's not my toilet. It's actually my bedroom, Greedax. But I'm not saying I've never taken a shit in it. No, just kidding. Definitely haven't. Thunder Road says, is there a schedule for Ayman's unscripted? Its numbers are looking good and another just dropped. There's no schedule, but any kind of sit-down interview that is length title. Yeah, very proud of it so far. Very proud of Ayman. I can say that because I don't think he's connected at the moment. He won't hear it. Thunder Road says, Ayman is a plumber's dream. Imagine the amount of hair that goes down that drain without a stopper. Jesus. More images I don't need. DB Cooper 1 also says, shout out Ayman Khan for the Caroline Dubois interview. Great stuff. dethroned Flexen Stan interview. His tea's gone cold. He's wondering why he got out of bed at all. Reminds me of PL and Man City lawyers being from the same law firm, SO Dubois LLC. Sultan Ibrahimov, welcome back. He says, Gad keeps saying Joshua fluffed his lines. Like, without that, Dubois wouldn't have won, and AJ made a schoolboy error. Gives no credit to Dubois. Paul Anthony says, we can't all just write boxers off because of a bad loss. Boxers bounce back. It's happened throughout history. DSN says, needs to build himself back up. Wilder versus Joshua, maybe Dillian White. Then the rematch. Got smoked against Ruiz, however, won the rematch. It's heavyweight boxing, man. Thunder Road is encouraging everyone to hit the thumbs up, which I would thoroughly endorse. John Trownson says, think the majority of fans at this point are sick of seeing him still being given champions privileges 3 years after losing the belts. Any rematch should be earned. Big Dosser says, AJ versus Butterbean, make it happen. 3 times, baby. Chris D says, he's fought valiant on the road to Dubois. So building confidence is a double-edged sword, especially with AJ's suspect chin. Waddy says, tired of seeing Joshua's inconsistency. Captain Casual says, listening at work, great work with the other Dubois interview, Ames. So more credit and well-deserved credit for that interview. KP says, Joshua goes back to training with Derek James. I'm guessing that's a prediction rather than a spoiler. Paul Heyman nod there. Keylap says, AJ gave his career to Dubois. We're going to put a poll out. I have been asking in our group chat who to add to the list of potential AJ next opponents. But I think the chat's kind of given us the answer here. So simple enough poll. Who should AJ fight next? And we're going to go with Deontay Wilder, as a lot of people are suggesting. Daniel Dubois in the rematch that's been talked about. Joe Joyce, something that was suggested by Jack Massey as a kind of confidence builder. And and Dillian White in another rematch, but maybe a more winnable one. I hope that's not insulting for AJ there. I'll put that in our group chat so Modfather Vinny can put it out as the poll. It'd be great to hear what you guys think. Ayman, are you back with us now? We've both had our wobbles.
I'm here. Earth to Danny, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. So we're going to put the poll out. Who should AJ's next opponent be? Out of the 4 people I just said, the Dubois rematch, the Dillian White rematch, Deontay Wilder, and Joe Joyce, because there are other names that have been suggested at various sources. What do you think is the best of those 4 options?
Oh, man, it's tough. Probably it's all about perspective here for me, because if you go into the Wilder fight, a lot of people are talking about how Wilder is kind of done with the sport and he's on his way out and he can't pull the trigger anymore. That fight has lost its sheen it should have happened so many years ago and it never happened. And now, off of the back of defeats that they've had, people are going to go into that. And yeah, sure, they'll be excited to a degree. And when it comes around to fight week, people will start to get ramped up and want to see the fight. But it's a hard sell to the hardcore audiences, which really kind of, they're the water that flows through the stream of boxing, if you want to call it that way. Maybe the casuals will catch on to it, but the casuals all watched in and tuned in to see Daniel Dubois dismantle Anthony Joshua at Wembley a week or so ago. It's a hard sell. There is history between AJ and Dillian White, which I think they can still reignite between the two, but it's a similar sort of story. Joyce as well too. That was a fight, maybe rewind 9 months ago, you were talking about a lot before Joyce fought Zhang and the history of them in GB. There's a lot of history in all these fights, but the one I'd still push for me over the other one is because they've had only 1 defeat on their record and seem to have a lot more life in their career as of right now if they choose to continue themselves. We haven't heard too much from this fight, and for me it's Filip Hrgović. I think you've got to claim that scalp, the one that Dubois beat as well too. He claimed his unbeaten record, but there are a couple of caveats to that in the headbutts and the cut he had sustained before he fought Daniel Dubois in sparring. And you can be the guy who can really do a job on Filip Hrgović. He never went down. He never dropped down to the canvas, Filip. He never had to climb up. He never got knocked out. He just got stopped on his feet. And he had to fight that way because of what happened in the weeks previous. I think AJ should take on Filip Hrgović. It's a guy who's still got momentum and gas left in his gas tank of his career, as opposed to the other options there. So I'd go something different. But out of the ones that you said, Danny, I'd probably go with Dillian Whyte because of the history, and it's an easier sell than it would be the likes of Wilder or any other.
Yeah, because initially it was supposed to be Dillian Whyte in his final warm-up for that clash, wasn't it? Before Daniel Dubois, I believe. And obviously the drug test issue happened. Hellenius came in, and we are where we are. But yeah, so out of those four, I thought Joyce was an interesting one because of the amateur history and the fact that Joyce is just coming off that defeat to Chisora. We know Chisora is not an option because of the close relationship he has with Joshua. I think Hrgovic is an interesting one. I don't know if it's as big a seller as Dillian Whyte, as an example, and Deontay Wilder certainly, but Wilder carries with it a certain amount of risk. Wilder's certainly not looked anything like his peak self in the last two fights. There's no denying that, but he's always got that puncher's chance. And with all the criticism of AJ's chin and his punch resistance, saw your interview, Ayman, earlier on the channel with Duke McKenzie, who suggests that Joshua's punch resistance is now gone. Do you want to put him in against a huge puncher on poor form? Or do you want to put him in against an inactive guy who doesn't punch as hard but may have more left in the tank in Dillian Whyte? I think when AJ goes forward now, given where he is in his career, no fight is without risk. And not because of his chin. I'm not knocking him at all. I think Dubois is a huge puncher. I think he would have, probably decapitated or metaphorically speaking, any heavyweight with that shot. But I do think that at this stage, AJ is one defeat away from almost being forced into retirement, depending on who the defeat's against. I think he could probably stand to lose another fight with Dubois or a huge fight with Fury, but I don't think he can lose at the next level below and still carry on fighting at this point. So they've got to make their next move very carefully. I just want to come back on one of the comments in the chat. Someone said Gad, that's Gareth A. Davis for the uninitiated at the Telegraph, was saying that giving all the blame for the defeat to Joshua and making mistakes rather than giving credit to Dubois. I don't want to slander Gad. Sometimes I do, but not right now because I haven't seen his report or his comments on this. What I would say is that Dubois won this every bit as much as AJ lost it, if not more. I thought Dubois, and I think I said some of this last week, I thought Dubois' performance was excellent. I thought by coming out on the front foot aggressively, taking the play away from Joshua, he took the physical advantage and the mental advantage at the same time. And I think he deserves a huge amount of credit because although his recent opposition was better than Joshua's, overall, and in terms of the occasion, he was taking a much bigger leap into the spotlight than Anthony Joshua was, and he dealt with it with aplomb. And I think he deserves huge credit for that. That doesn't mean Joshua got everything perfect, though. He was with a training team that he'd been bedded in with by this point. Looking at the Shane McGuigan piece on, was it TalkSport, Ayman, or Radio 5, or whoever was covering that? I think it was TalkSport, where Shane McGuigan was talking about the start of the fifth round and the mistakes, perhaps the mistaken advice that was given in the corner. BBC. Okay, so yeah, Radio 5, presumably. Yeah. So he was talking about that. There did seem to be some errors made in the corner, albeit Ben Davison said after the fight, Dubois didn't bring anything they were surprised about. They expected a fast start. And a lot of people are putting it down to, and I don't know if this is, similar to what Gad said, but taking that big shot early on that dropped Joshua in the first round, he never fully recovered from that. I think there's some sense to that, but I don't think his tactics afterwards made it easier for him to recover. We saw him really badly rocked against Vladimir Klitschko famously at Wembley Stadium before, and he was able to get back into the fight because he basically took a round and a half off, just moved a lot, was defensive, and got his wits back about him before then pushing for the stoppage. He didn't do that against Dubois. He was too aggressive, if anything. He decided to meet fire with fire before his head had fully cleared. And I think whether you blame the corner for that or AJ himself, that was a potentially crucial mistake. But we'll see. I think Dubois is only going to improve. AJ can definitely have a better game plan and put in a better performance. But overall, as a fighter at this stage of his career, he's probably not going to improve. Dubois is only 27, a baby in heavyweight terms, and he will get better and better, especially fighting the quality of opposition that now 3 fights in, or 4 fights in, if you include, obviously, the defeats at Usyk. He's learning all the time. His defeats are against quality operators. Certainly Joyce at the point when he fought him was that, probably not so much now. and Joshua most recently. So, yeah, I mean, all credit or as much credit as possible to Dubois. That seems a little hypocritical, given as I've decided AJ should be the face of this week's episode. But I think the intrigue now is mostly around his comeback and if he can return to the stage that he was at before. Let me just go back to the chat because I think quite a lot has come in since I was last there. I just flicked through and saw someone saying AJ should fight my gran. So I'm sure I'll get to that ultimately and see what the rationale is behind that. Maybe Gran's a big banger. No offense. MB says, like it or not, Joshua is the money man in the division. He will keep getting chances while he brings in the dollars. Big Dosser says AJ is as stiff as concrete. Waddy says he should consider micro-dosing with an emoji of a mushroom. KP says rematch. And this is alluding to our poll, of course. We're asking who should Joshua fight next. Please vote if you haven't already. DM Tuza says AJ versus Wilder is the fight to make. They both can get up for that fight. Yeah, but once one of them goes down, can they get up? That's the question. Do you like that? Big Dosser says AJ versus Keir Starmer. I'm assuming that's in response to Build Back Better headline, which was, I believe, was Labour's slogan for the election. Cuss's System says Hearn said that AJ has between 1 to 3 fights left in him. So Dubois rematch first. I want to talk a little bit about Hearn's comments as an aside to all of this in a minute when he was speaking to our Josh Green. John Trounston, does anyone here know of any other historical case of a beaten challenger being given an instant rematch? I'd have to look into that. I do remember, and this wasn't an instant rematch, but I do remember Mario Vite getting a rematch against Joe Calzaghe despite getting absolutely splattered in the first fight in 1 round. But he'd worked his way back into the mandatory position. Captain Casual says Dubois' rematch is absolutely pointless. If it wasn't AJ, the narrative would have been it was terrible matchmaking for Triple D. Such was the dominant nature of the performance. James Salter, Wilder then a rematch with Dubois if all goes well. Then maybe a winner of Dubois, AJ versus the winner of Usyk Fury. Cuss's System again says, also, I'd like to see what Don Charles and Ben Davison do with a rematch. Yeah, how they would that. But that's assuming that Joshua and Dubois, I suppose, are going to stay with the same trainers. And we're going to talk a little bit in the next segment about the relationship between Don Charles and the Dubois. Mark Purdy says, Dillian White is done, washed up, finished. Do you want to find another synonym, Mark? I'm not sure you're getting your point across just yet. James Salter, Hergovich, bit under the scenes. Hear his a bit of a problem. Maybe a do with Parker. Not quite sure what James Salter's getting at there. We'll try and work that out. Sultan Ibrahimov, Dillian shouldn't be anywhere near a big fight after the Fury performance, and not to mention failing 4 tests in his combat career. Thunder Road says AJ versus Joseph Parker makes more sense as a rematch than White. Yeah, but it doesn't make more commercial sense necessarily. Cuss's System, spot on Danny that Dubois was physically and mentally better prepared. Jim says it's disgraceful as certain fighters have reaped all the rewards while genuine contenders are left to stagnate waiting for their rightful shot. Corruption front and centre. I'm not sure it's corruption, Jim. I think it's more putting commercial motivations ahead of what's right from a sporting perspective. But that seems like a conversation for a whole separate episode. Jack Dutton says, I read Hearn is saying there could be a rematch as soon as February. I think that would be a mistake. I think pretty much the same result would happen again. Keylap says, clearly AJ is not interested in boxing. That's a bit of a leap, Keylap. Sultan Ibrahimov, after AJ said he never wants another fight like that, in Triple D fight, he took more punishment when he's not as good. Reckon he guessed fighting more rounds. Gassed was less appealing than getting KO'd. Ramoni Mode XD says, Danny, are you allowed to elaborate on the issues that cause Seconds Out not to cover the event? I can briefly kind of elaborate on it. I think I already did last week. Obviously, we don't want any more issues, so there's only so much I will say. But we did cover the event ultimately. We were able to take the stream for the press conference and the weigh-in, and we did have people there covering it on site on fight night as well. There was an issue with some coverage Seconds Out did on a previous live episode that did offend some people in the Riyadh season team. I'm not going to go into specifics about what that was, but I think there was fault on our side. I'm not saying we were completely wrong or there was anything malicious on our part, but there were mistakes made and there were talks behind the scenes between us and the people involved, and we managed to smooth things over in time for fight night. It will not affect our editorial integrity. We're not going to start pulling punches, whereas before we would have gone out all guns blazing, but we may, of course, be a bit more careful about not going beyond what's acceptable and reasonable from a journalistic perspective, which we should be doing anyway, which we should all be doing anyway. MPNE44 says Parker versus Dubois would be fireworks if it happens. Sean says AJ let the hype get to him, underestimated Dubois. He will get the rematch. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt if AJ wants the rematch, it will happen. It's just whether it's sensible. James Saul says here, Hrgovic is a bit of a good boxer. Let's see how he is against Parker, as I've seen him come up in the ranks. Thanks, James. I'm glad you deciphered your own message. Greedak says AJ needs to get rid of that PE teacher. Wow. Boxer size Ben back again. I thought we'd done with all that, to be honest. Ben's best attribute is taking world-class fighters and getting them not spark out. Billy Joe Saunders, I mean, he was fighting Canelo. Haney, AJ, Fury Wilder won almost. Maybe you can count almost. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, as Gorilla Monsoon used to say. Jim says, funny how Double D was an email champion, which is Triple D. But if AJ had beaten him, then AJ was going to be classed as a legitimate champ. How does that work? I mean, I never classed Triple D as an email champion. I know Billy Nelson did in one of our headlines, so I'll take partial responsibility for the headline at least. DB Cooper 1 says, that live stream was one of the few I missed where you pissed off Turkey. I'm not confirming or denying that. Clearly, this chat goes to shite without me. We need some parliamentary procedure in here, as the sheriff, Chris Eubank Sr. says. We'll be talking about Eubank Jr. in a little while. Stephen, box size Ben is back working at Pure Gym this week. I think we've had enough Ben Davison slander for one episode. Not from us, thankfully. Big Dosser says AJ has been down more times. No, I'm not reading the rest of that message because we will probably get sued. And rightly so, Big Dosser. Have a word with yourself, mate, or I'll have to put you on the naughty step. But yeah, just going back to what I was saying about the Eddie Hearn stuff. So my colleague, or our colleague, Josh Green, interviewed Eddie after the Sheffield show on Saturday night. Congratulations, by the way, to Terry Harper, who's not only a lovely lady, but is now a three-weight world champion. So congratulations to her. And unlucky to Rhiannon Dixon, I'm sure she will come again. But yeah, Eddie Hearn was speaking to our Josh Green, and he was asked how much of an impact would an AJ retirement make to Matchroom's bottom line? And Eddie Hearn got a lot of criticism for his answer, but said it makes very little difference. Said AJ fights always bring in a lot of money, but in terms of the overall boxing business, it would make very little impact. Ayman, what did you make of Hearn's response? And also, how much of the commercial side of things do you think will play into the decision about Joshua's next fight?
You just broke a little bit there, Danny. I can hear you now. I think I got the gist of that question. And look, I'm not too sure. Like, obviously, we won't have a grasp of the finances and everything behind the scenes as to AJ and what he brings, but it's always a big night. It's always a big fight. It's always looking like it's a commercial revenue generator when Anthony Joshua's in town and he's fighting. We certainly know that. Everyone in the industry certainly knows that. And to say it wouldn't make a jot of difference on the finances for Matchroom Boxing, I'm not too sure about that, to be fair. I'm sure that with Matchroom Boxing and Anthony Joshua still in their stable, they're a lot stronger than they would be without Anthony Joshua in their stable. I think any promoter would love to, even Joshua's current status of having been knocked out by Daniel Dubois, would love to pick up AJ into their promotional stable and have them fight under their banner. I think a large part of I don't think Matchroom won't have any real say as to really whether AJ is to continue. I do believe Eddie Hearn's rhetoric, and he says it a lot, that AJ is his own boss, and I think he's transcended that point where, maybe in 20 years ago when fighters or promoters would say, look, we need you to continue on, and if that was ever the case here with Eddie Hearn suggesting that's AJ, which I don't think it would be, but hypothetically, AJ would be able to say to himself, no, this is my decision. I'm the boss here. If I want to continue, I'll take that into my mind and I'll make that final decision on that. I believe that AJ is the curator of his own career here. And that's to Matchroom's benefit for him to continue. But I think they're standoffish and just accept whatever it is the position is on AJ's career. But it does benefit Matchroom, of course, because of the big nights, because of a big Wembley money spinner. Of course, who would suggest that? I don't think Eddie's quite being fully truthful there when he's saying that it wouldn't affect their finances if AJ wasn't to continue. But Matchroom, to be fair, have gone from strength to strength with the recent deals they've had over in the US, solidifying themselves over there as one of the major offerings of boxing in that country and in the UK. Maybe a little bit less so in the UK, but with the also with the introduction of Riyadh Season and Turkey Al-Sheikh and the money that he brings and the fights and the spotlights that he brings as well too. Maybe there's a factor in that as well too. Eddie's suggestion, look, we'll be perfectly fine without Anthony Joshua if he was to, hang up the gloves here. You wouldn't come out and say, look, we need AJ to continue, otherwise our business is going up in smoke here. So there's a bit of handling the situation as well too. But I think Eddie knows very well that Anthony Joshua and Matchroom continuing a lifelong deal or a career-long deal that they signed him down to, there's a reason for that, is very beneficial for both.
Surely if he loses his next fight at a lower level, that 3 fights, 1 to 3 quickly becomes 1. And maybe a farewell fight if we're lucky, or if he's lucky.
That perspective will change pretty quickly, Danny, for sure. Because let's play with this hypothetically. If he wins those 3 fights and those 3 fights become 5 fights, or why would you retire now? You can keep going. Like, you're on top of the sport. Undisputed is within your grasp. Like, that's a very variable figure. It's just literally perspective, like circumstance led right now. Well, I think Danny's just dropped off again. The connection, the Gremlins and the connection. It's Gremlins 4. Did we get to Gremlins 4? I'm not quite sure when the original trilogy or the original 4 movies. I'm not quite sure how many there were, but they're definitely bothering Danny's connection right now as he looks to build back himself, rebuild his internet dial-up, and wind up the hamster on the wheel to get back onto the internet stream. Let's jump into the chat, see what you guys are saying here. Warren was saying IBF don't do rematches for their Mandos, which is why Usyk got stripped. How was AJ able to get the rematch clause for Usyk 1? Oh, Danny's back here. Danny, I just jumped into the chat momentarily, but I think you're back here. Are you here? Can you hear me?
Yeah. I was just gonna listen to you go through the chat, see how you deal with these reprobates.
I'll let you. I'll pass the baton back to you.
Oh, cheers, mate. So yeah, Sultan and Brajmov, I think this was the one you were reading. Warren was saying the IBF don't do rematches for their Mandos, which is why Usyk got stripped. How was AJ able to get rematch calls for Usyk 1? That's something we'll have to try and find out, I suppose. DB Cooper 1 is having a go at Ebony Bridges for some reason, but we'll pass on that. Stephen says Ayman was so confident of AJ beating Dubois. Oh, Ayman was so funny. No, Ayman picked Dubois. Stephen, I'm not sure where you've got that from.
Stephen, it's on record twice as well too. It's on record on the Seconds Out live predictions and of course Seconds Out live stream, and also as a bonus, it's also live on the Boxing Asylum Nut House podcast on record there. I gave my opinion before the fight there on that podcast as well too. So maybe you got your fighters mixed up in that one, but I was confident that Dubois would beat AJ in this circumstance.
Yeah, we had it on last week's episode that only 9 of 50 people asked picked Dubois for that fight, and Ayman was one of the 9, alongside the likes of Adam Morley, and I'm trying to remember who else was on the list. Probably don't want to go into that again. I'm sure Josh Hart will be messaging in a minute.
Maxie Hughes.
Go on.
Maxie Hughes was one of them, and Duke McKenzie as well too.
Oh, there you go. Sultan Ibrahimov says that's hard to believe as Hearn was calling for a rematch while AJ was breakdancing on the canvas. John Trouson says, to be fair to Ben for a minute, when he said bring it up, I don't think he meant from 5 yards away. AJ is done, but British boxing ain't, says IBN M. DB Cooper 1 says, I'm an accountant by trade. The Matchroom Boxing Limited accounts since 2015 correlate directly with AJ's boom-bust career. Snooker darts is where most value of Matchroom is. Big up Eddie's sister. Thunder Road says, RIP Dikembe Mutombo. I'm waving my finger in his honour. Endorse that. Stephen said Turkey and Eddie got cooked when Dubois ended the hype train. Beautiful, humbling all round for the Joshua fans. That. IBNM says never use the Godfather soundtrack. DB Cooper 1 says AJ has 1 fight left on his Riyadh season contract. I imagine a big part of his purse bonus is linked to completing it, hence why he's not retiring. He ain't stupid. And Stephen says, my bad, Ayman. This week has been a blur. Fair play to you. It was Josh Hart. Yeah, maybe. I don't want to say it, and then Josh Hart messages as well and says, no, I picked the bar too. But yeah, so fair play to Ayman anyway. So that's the AJ Dubois kind of aftermath dealt with. We are going to talk a bit more about that in the Dubois section. But we're not on that just yet. We want to talk a little bit, first of all. I think number 2 on our running order was the Chris Eubank Jr. segment. Is that correct, Ayman? Can you? Yes, it is. I've just double checked. So Vinny, Mod Father Vinny, if you can hear me, we are going to be talking about Eubank Jr. now. And we've got to be very careful what we say, because for anyone that missed it, Chris Eubank Jr., who's part of the Dmitry Bivol Artur Beterbiev undercard in a few weeks' time, went on a bit of a rant, or a lot of a rant, at the press conference last week in London, and was quickly compelled, shall we say, persuaded to apologise, as was Frank Warren, who was one of the main targets of his tirade. Basically went into business for himself, Eubank Jr., and verbally abused not only Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, Kalle Sauerland, but also his de facto brother-in-law in Matchroom CEO Frank Smith, which we asked Frank about. He was rather bemused by the whole thing last week, and only really gave credit to Turki Al-Sheikh, who's obviously paying him a hell of a lot of money, I would imagine, for his fight on that undercard. But also Ben Shalom, who he called a cool guy. Ayman, while we can't quote verbatim what Chris Eubank Jr. said for obvious reasons, we don't want to get sued. I'm not going to beat around the bush. What did you make of his outburst? And was it, as some have suggested, purely a reason to increase interest in a fight that was rather underwhelming to most?
No, I don't think that's what it was, because for me, like, that doesn't sell the fight anymore. I'm not tuning into Chris Eubank Jr. to handle Kamil Szeremeta any easier than I would have thought it would, or it doesn't make the fight any more exciting or any more fireworks from it, because Kamil Szeremeta isn't fighting the battle of the promoters here, although maybe some of them might want Kamil to come out on top off of the back of that tirade from Eubank Jr. I don't think it is that. I think Eubank Jr. has obviously had a gripe for a long time with certain people and wanted to express that where he could be the most loudest, and he picked his moment, and he got the repercussions of that moment as well too. I wouldn't doubt that maybe there's a few boxers retired or otherwise that maybe might have a little bit of a smile, but also some boxers who might think, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do as well. Maybe you should handle that behind the scenes as well, and maybe stick it to the promoters if you feel that way, with victories, with your successes, with your moments in the sun. And that's the way that you can really kind of get back at them. But it was, with that said, it was very entertaining. I did find that a very amusing moment, not because of who he was going at, but just because of how kind of out of the blue it seemed to be. And it did kind of cause a bit of a stir in amongst the media as well too for Chris, who maybe, look, it all seems smoothed over for now, but we'll see if Chris does end up fighting on that undercard. Who knows what might change in the background, and who, and if the fight does go ahead, hopefully it does. And I don't think anything will happen, but stranger things have happened in boxing. But Chris certainly picked a moment in time to share his thoughts with the world, and he's since had to. And also Frank Warren, I believe, has also said, "Look, we'll put this to bed now. It's been said, it's been done. Let's move on."
Yeah, I mean, I don't see much hope of Eubank being put to bed in that fight. So if the promoters are vesting their interest in his opponent, I don't see him being very satisfied by the outcome. But yeah, I see your point. I guess, no one's going to tune in just because of a press conference rant, although the rant itself, I'm sure, got a huge amount of views across social media. I don't know if Eubank Jr. planned it or not, and how sincere it was. There was the kind of the remarks directed at Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith regarding the Conor Benn fight didn't seem to chime with the attitude of Eubank and his team at the time. He seemed just as keen for the fight to still go ahead after Conor Benn's drug test as anyone else was. So I'm not sure how sincere or authentic his comments were, but I know Frank Warren's reaction was certainly real. He was absolutely fuming from what I could see. So yeah, I'm not surprised that whoever it was got the two of them in a room. Probably not, because that would have been combustible, but got the two of them separately and, talked both parties down and got those apologies issued. And now we can look forward to the show itself. But it did certainly liven up what was not necessarily a drab affair, but not the most exciting press conference I've ever been to before that. Let me just see. What have we got? Jam Edwards says, I think Derek James and Ben Davison should join forces to train AJ for the Dubois rematch, as he will have the power and the defense. It's interesting. I remember asking Tyson Fury before the Dillian White fight if he'd consider bringing Ben Davison back into the team. And he said, yeah, because he'd be really good at kind of the movement and the defensive side. And he had Sugar Hill for the aggressive offensive side. So I don't know if they ever would work together, Derek James and Ben Davison. But, you know, if AJ can't get two more influential trainers to join forces, then I'm not sure anyone can. Sultan Ibrahimov says, also, people forgetting AJ's age. Is he too old to learn new tricks? Can he develop much more at this stage in his career? Feel his downsides will now always be there. Yeah, I think it's as much about experience as age. I think when you've established patterns, when you do the same thing for a long time, regardless of whether you're, 30 or 40, I think it is much harder to adapt and to alter your style to any great degree. It's more about refining what you're good at and kind of minimizing what you're bad at. Don't put yourself in positions where your flaws can be exposed, I guess would be the main issue there. James Sauce says, massive undercard for Bivol Baturbiev, Wardley Clark, etc. should be big. Yeah, I mean, that's an element of this as well. I felt that Eubank Jr.'s rant, whether, he meant it to cause the stir it did or not, I'm sure he did. He's a great self-promoter. It took away a lot of the shine from the rest of the undercard, and Eubank Jr.'s fight is one of the least competitive on paper. So that in itself was a bit disappointing. I think the Wardley Clark rematch looks certain to be a banger. So I'm looking forward to that. And a lot of the fights on the undercard are really interesting. But yeah, so it's a shame, Jack Massey going into the Jaya Pattaya fight with real confidence, although, not many people outside of his team are giving him a chance of winning it. He certainly believes he can. And a number of the other fights on there, really, really interesting to watch. So it's a shame that the focus has been on Eubank, including here. I mean, I'm not being hypocritical about it. Our focus has been on Eubank because it's what caused the most commotion at the time. DB Cooper one says, Hearn keeps saying Eubank's rant was planned, but Junior was almost tearing up speaking out. That was raw and brutally honest, as you YouTube merchants would say. We try not to use raw, to be honest. Stephen says, surprised by Eubank, what he was saying so broad, leaving what he was saying and up to interpretation. Thought he was more clever than that. Yeah, I mean, he obviously wanted it to be. And let me just say this as well. Eubank Jr. will know that even after the apologies and people may have taken down some of the quotes or whatever else because of the threat of legal action, he'll know that will live forever. Those clips will never, he can't unsay the quotes. So he'll know that will have caused a commotion, that will cause people to question what was going on, regardless of, any apologies that happened later on. Thunder Road says, why would anyone get sued for repeating what Eubank said? It's newsworthy and does not mean you're endorsing the accusation. Yeah, I mean, it is a tricky one, though, because if you're saying some of the stuff Eubank said does fall into defamation, and you can say it's in public interest, but then you have to have the money available to fight the case, regardless of whether you think you're in the right or not. So it's a minefield. Jam Edwards says, Frank Warren's face was priceless when Eubank went off on his rant. Fizz says, if AJ wants to continue, he has to rematch and beat Dubois to be taken seriously. Sultan Ibrahimov says, to be honest, Eubank only knew of one of Ben's failed tests at the time. The one he failed before signing was withheld from him. Even if that's the case, I mean, does it make a difference how many positive tests? If someone you're scheduled to fight tests positive for a performance-enhancing substance and you're still willing to fight them despite that, it's not really fair to criticize other people for wanting the fight to go ahead, is it? Thunder Road, Eubank will be bad-mouthing Shalom in due time. Warren did sue Eubank, but according to Frankie, won damages, so it doesn't sound like a frivolous lawsuit. Yeah, I think it was £200,000 he was awarded. I don't know if he won the damages or if it was a settlement, but that was due to Eubank pulling out of a fight when he was with one of Warren's fighters many years ago. But yeah, Warren did win. Warren very rarely loses in court, let's be honest. John Trounston, whether or not he planned the initial comments, he definitely wasn't planning the grovelling apology. Stephen says, hello, lads. What do we think about Dubois having more experience than Joshua? He's been boxing since the age of 9. Joshua started at 18. Yeah, there's different levels of experience is what I would say to that. Anthony Joshua fought as a senior, whereas Dubois didn't. And Joshua also fought at major international competitions. He's Olympic gold medalist, world amateur championship finalist as well. So I think he's had the greater high level experience as an amateur, albeit not for as long as Dubois. Dubois didn't get a lot of fights as a junior and never fought as a senior. He moved around clubs a lot as well as an amateur. So I think it kind of evens out. Fizz, not of Coronation Street fame, I'm assuming, says, I'm giving Massey a 40% chance for the upset, which I think is pretty good from what I've seen other people saying. Sultan Ibrahimov, failing another test does make a difference, surely. Otherwise, the punishment should be the same for one or multiple failed tests. Yeah, no, Sultan, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it doesn't make a difference in terms of the severity of the punishment or of the, act in the first place. What I'm saying is, if you're willing to fight someone on one failed test, would you then not be willing to fight them after two? I don't think that side of it makes a difference. DB Cooper once says he'd pay 50 quid pay-per-view for a live stream of the Eubank Christmas dinner with Frank Smith. Maybe he's not going to be invited. Maybe it's all awkward now. Maybe Frank's going away for Christmas. Who knows? We shall see. Let's move back to more Joshua-adjacent business. And that's the Dubois family, which, if people didn't already know, they certainly know now, has got rather a fracture running within it. We initially spoke to Caroline Dubois probably around a year ago outside the McGuigan gym. And she told us that she doesn't speak to her dad at the moment. She didn't go into great detail about why. Then I obviously interviewed Stan Dubois, Dave Dubois, call him what you want. Well, not what you want, especially not on here. And we went into detail over an hour, and he talked about why, in his view, the relationship between himself and his daughter one of his daughters had broken down. And then most notably and most recently, Ayman went to Shane McGuigan's gym and got a chance to speak with Caroline Dubois for an episode of his new Unscripted series. And kudos to Ayman. I'd just like to add my respect to the mass adoration Ayman's received in recent times for the Caroline Dubois interview, which was superb, I think, by any stretch of the imagination. In my view, one of the best interviews we've ever had on the Seconds Out channel. I urge you, if you haven't already watched it, to go and do so. Or if you have, please do so again, not until this podcast has finished. But in which she went into great detail about her reasons for moving out of the family home and for no longer having a relationship with either her father or with her older brother, Daniel Dubois. In fact, she didn't even watch his victory over Anthony Joshua. Ayman, I guess, first of all, talking about this, what did you make of Caroline's mindset and approach when talking about such a sensitive subject?
She seemed very confident and she seemed very assured in what she was saying. And I thought that was a real credit to her, who'd obviously been to a lot. And I gauge from, just to put myself in her shoes for a brief second, that she'd obviously been through a lot. This has been through her head numerous times, and she must have kind of thought about how she'd approach it. And when maybe she thought about it a few times, it would lend her to be becoming emotional about it. But as time went on, she got more confident and where she stood with things and how she's grown and the independence she's gained, that she's made the right decision with things, that she's made the right choice to remove herself from the situation, and she's made the right choice to, as was her choice, to speak out about it. I thought it was lovely to hear someone so just confident and just free speaking, is unreserved in the way that they thought and felt about things. I thought she'd come across really well, and it's in those interviews where I know you're giving me the praise there, and I know this isn't what you're saying, but it's the praises and the kind of gratitude, I guess, is to the interviewee for sharing that real private moment, that real private part of their life and their history, but also to celebrate as well, kind of just that kind of journey that they've been. And journey is a cliche word, but it was, and I felt that when she kind of answered the question, she spoke for a long time, this was really like a difficult period of her life that she'd condensed down into 8 or 9 or 10 minutes as she replied back, and trying to kind of give the people her side of the story. And even then, understanding as well too that people will hear her father's side, people will hear her side, and she can't win everyone over. She had a full understanding and maturity. That's the word I've been looking for as I've been speaking. A maturity to the situation, a maturity to the understanding of how people might react to the situation, but also the maturity to kind of take onus of the situation and want to speak out. So full of only pure admiration for Caroline, and I thank her for her trust in myself and in Seconds Out to get that across her point of view.
Yeah, I found the reaction to it gratifying for the most part, especially all the kind of compliments on how sensitively you handled the situation. But there was kind of a stream running through the feedback that disappointed me. And there was a lot of people criticizing a little bit us for talking about the issue in the first place. And to that, I'd say that Caroline was keen to have her right of reply after, the interview with her father had become incredibly popular in the build up to the Joshua fight. But also a lot of criticism of Caroline herself for, as some people saw it, certainly on the YouTube feedback, airing dirty laundry in public, which I really didn't like. You've got a young woman who's, from her own, what she said, was often silenced, not allowed to be her true self as she was growing up with her father. And society as a whole has often, silenced women, especially ones they deem as troublesome or a threat to the patriarchy. I don't want to go into too much detail there, primarily because I'm not that well versed on the subject. But I don't think it's right to then try and shut Caroline down when she's saying what she really believes. It's obviously taken a lot of bravery, a lot of courage to get to this point. It's not easy to move out of the family home with a couple of your younger siblings when your father and his teachings, his way of raising you is all you've ever known. And she's been brave enough to do that, and now brave enough to talk about it. And only did she talk about it in detail when her father had done so in a previous interview. So I endorse what Ayman said. I think, full credit to Caroline for speaking about it. I also made that clear to her personally or directly as well. But yeah, I don't think it's right. All these people saying, well, your father's, you'll never get that relationship back if you talk about it publicly. No, I mean, if Dave Stan was happy to talk about it publicly, and he was, I didn't force it out of him, then there's no reason why Caroline should get her side of the story out as well. And the feedback overall has been positive, predominantly positive. So yeah, I mean, I was disappointed by some of the naysayers, and not because it's criticizing content on Seconds Out, but because it's basically telling young woman who's already been through a hell of a lot to not tell her story. And I don't think it's anyone's right to do that. I think the only person that gets to decide whether to open up about something so sensitive is the person themselves, and in this case, Caroline Dubois. Let's just have a look at what the chat's saying. Brace myself for more criticism, perhaps. Cuss's System says, Ayman, also a very good interview with Duke McKenzie, which is a great watch. DB Coupon says, I can see why Shane McGuigan chose to stay with Caroline over Daniel now, despite the huge heavyweight money on offer. Respect Shane a lot for that. Good man. I actually spoke to a notable figure in boxing. I'm not going to say who it was because he hasn't said I can say this on camera yet. But he probably will be on the channel soon anyway. But he said he's got huge respect for Shane McGuigan, despite not always getting on with him on a personal level, primarily because he could have chosen Daniel rather than Caroline, and instead helped set Daniel up with Don Charles and stuck by Caroline, which I think, says a lot about the man himself. Nat says, the Caroline Dubois interview was great. I really like her as a person, and she came across so well. Fantastic talent too. Props to Ayman well in the sensitive way he handled it. Thunder Road says, a big part of your business is relationships. Ayman has a good rapport with Caroline. She was very comfortable. Danny used to have a relationship with Lou DiBella, but it's apparently gone now. Yeah, I mean, we keep trying to kind of revive DiBella's Digest. And we haven't fallen out. We still talk and everything. But every time we kind of do it, we set a time and then it doesn't happen. And I just think Lou's a lot busier than he was previously. Or maybe he just does hate me and just hasn't had the, I can't imagine Lou would ever hold back. But maybe he just hasn't had the time to tell me yet. Fizz says they love the interview. Sultan Ibrahimov said it was a good interview, but have to be careful when driving a wedge into family ties. But in my opinion, Caroline is a grown woman, so understands what the interview could do. Yeah, I mean, I don't think, if anything, I know you're not saying this, but I don't think we're driving a wedge into anything. I think the wedge is already very much there. I think as soon as Caroline made the decision, and her siblings did too, to leave the family home, I think that relationship, I'm not saying it's irreparable. I'm not sure any relationship's ever truly irreparable, but certainly became fractured. And I can't see them making up anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, I guess bringing it to the public I mean, I'm not going to sit here and claim that it's of great public interest and we had a duty to report it. We didn't. But it was something that Stan brought up when I interviewed him. And it was something that Caroline very much wanted to talk about, having seen her father's account and disagreeing vehemently with it, as anyone who's seen the interview will know. James Salter says, I think Dubois done brilliant, was a big performance. Joshua got the shock of his life, should have been stopped early, I think. Yeah, so one of the things that I would say as well is that the kind of fractured relationship between Caroline and Daniel Dubois is one that that's the one that kind of is more poignant for me. And that's not because, I've got no sympathy for the father-daughter thing, but just the fact that Daniel wasn't really, Caroline doesn't hold him as having done anything wrong, particularly in the situation. She's not blaming him for the way in which she was raised or the end of the relationship with her father. It's just a case that he stayed at home. Stan Dubois is still very much a part of Daniel Dubois' team and his career and his life. And that's meant that the siblings are no longer speaking to each other. And I think that's a great shame about this whole thing. Ayman, there's also the issue of Don Charles's relationship with Stan Dubois, something that was brought into stark focus in the week leading up to the Joshua fight, in which Spencer Fearon, I think it was, claimed that there was a rift between the two, and that's why we weren't seeing Don Charles during fight week. As it turned out, he was ill with the flu. He was in bed for most of fight week, was there on fight night, and has talked a lot since the fight about the kind of misinformation going around. What do you make of, because you've spoken to Don at length previously, what did you make of Don's kind of attitude both before and after the fight?
Yeah, look, I mean, it all seems to, that whole situation with Don and his illness, I think there should have been a bit more of a care as to what the media were kind of going with and the questions that were being asked surrounding that. I don't think anyone really fact-checked it or bothered to ask kind of if they had a connection to Don Charles or otherwise. At least people that are active on the scene didn't seem to do that and just kind of ran with the story because the story was of interest. And I guess the facts get in the way of a good story here. But in that fight week, I reached out to someone who knew Don Charles very well and just asked him what's the case here, and they said there's nothing to it. He's just bedbound with the flu. I didn't feel that duty. I'm not really that guy that then puts out like, hey, this is all rubbish. Don Charles got the flu. Carry on. I don't really feel like I'm a Benson in that way or someone else. And then I think in the morning, Chris McKenna, good journalist that he is, he then put it out. So I was like, all right, sweet. Someone's put it out there, and it can kind of be put to rest here. But there are kind of those rumors that were running around about kind of the camp and things like that. But then I saw that little clip of like when they were celebrating in the corner, and Stan Dubois, who's also very particular and very, chooses his words particularly and has a reason behind every word that he speaks. At least that's what I got from your interview with him, Danny. He then said, he said, well done to Don Charles. Like he made a mention to go over to Don and say, well done. And Don took, I was like, yes, like that was like the moment he'd kind of been waiting for. And he's like, I love you, like kind of thing. And you don't express love for someone, if you don't have that back. So I don't know, maybe a lot has been made of kind of the whispers that have been kind of going around about the camp. And maybe it isn't as fractious as people may make it out to be. At least that's kind of my finger on the pulse of it right now. But what's more of interest at the moment is Don Charles's kind of reaction to things. And now that Don has kind of had his crowning moment, his moment where he's guided Daniel Dubois to victory over Anthony Joshua, he's kind of taken the moment where his voice is the loudest to say his piece and to say how. And I thought it was actually really poignant. It's a good word you said earlier, Danny. Poignant. It's a real good word to use in respect of Don Charles, who, he said, "Look, this industry has crushed me. Like I was never handed anything. I was never given anything. I can't remember he quite said this, but to paraphrase him and put me in his shoes for a moment, he was never given these blue chip prospects or given these opportunities, and now that he's guided someone to, and he's guided other fighters to different levels of the pyramid to success, he's finally been given someone, and he's shown what he can do with someone who has big profile, has big capabilities, and he's a safe pair of hands to guide someone with the experiences that he has. And he's used that moment as well too to kind of dig out a few people and just say, look, you you didn't back me. Your job here is to look at this and look at that, but you got it wrong. You kind of overlooked me and what I do and looked at this side of things. And I think it's fair for Don to say his piece. I think a couple of people, and the boxing fraternity, the boxing public might say to Don, look, maybe just reel it in a little bit, because you don't want to. The goodwill is all towards you right now. You don't want to spoil that. But I kind of feel like, look, Don, say your piece. Don't feel like you have to be filtered in any way. If that's the way you feel, then be the way you feel. And I feel like it's I appreciate Don's honesty in wanting to say what he's said so far in the aftermath of everything, because he has been overlooked by the industry, and as well too, like, this is an industry where, and I think Don's been really good because I've had the opportunity to go through his doors and see what he does in a training camp, and how he sets up his fighters, and how he sets up his training camps, and what he wants from his fighters, and how he calls things out, and how he helps grow fighters. I've been able to see that, whereas many in the industry kind of don't do that. So you get an idea and reflection when people could kind of say, this fella said, Ayman was picking AJ over Dubois. No, this is one of the reasons. This is why I was picking Dubois over AJ, because I've seen what he does. I've seen how he operates, and I have the confidence in him to have done the job on the opponent on that night. I wish a lot more trainers would do a similar sort of thing than that Don would, but he's also of a different generation too. He's old school. He won't be denied. He's persevered here, and he's got his moments. So let Don say whatever he wants, because I think he's earned that moment.
Yeah, I completely agree. Stephen says, has Stan Dubois contacted Seconds Out to discuss what Caroline said? Life is too short. Hopefully Caroline and Stan have a grown-up conversation soon. No, I haven't heard from Stan. Obviously, he's got my number. I did consider reaching out to him, but it seems like maybe a bit too soon after the fight and after Caroline's interview. But yeah, watch this space, I guess. Sultan Ibrahimov says, has Dan thanked anyone other than his dad after any of his previous victories? I'm not sure, but I mean, after the Joshua fight, he did say, God bless you all, about 50 times. I haven't counted, but roughly. And surely Don Charles is included within all. John Trounson says, after years of seeing my YouTube feed full of John Fury, Big John Fisher, and Teofimo Sr., I make sure to never click on anything related to any boxer's dads now. James Salter says, Joshua was lucky not to land on the stall in the corner as well. Was nearly like Hillary swanking $1 Million Baby. Got a bit hectic. DB Cooper one says, I like Don Charles. Got a lot of praise, but he's losing fans with some of his comments. Huge chip on his shoulder by backing Chisora over a young AJ, only to be dropped by Chisora anyway. Missed out on the pounds. Yeah, but then surely that's loyalty, isn't it? I don't think he should be criticised for being loyal, necessarily. Jim says, don't know what Fearon was going on about. If Triple D wanted to get in touch with Don, all he had to do was go on social media and get in touch. He certainly didn't need Fearon to do it for him. I think there's a bit more than just getting in touch. I think Spencer Fearon really endorsed Don to Daniel's father. I think they, had a better relationship back then than they clearly do now. And I think he really pushed for Don to be the man to take the reins with Daniel. So, yeah, I think there's a bit more to it than that. Lewis Hart says, Danny Flexen out. I don't know why Lewis Hart's rocked up at 9 minutes past 5 when we've been going since 4 o'clock. Lewis is currently in Marbella at the moment. He had too many carbs before Marbs, though, and it's kind of paling into comparison to some of the other fellas with their tops off out there from what I've seen. But yeah, thanks for watching, mate. He says, great Caroline Dubois interview, and he's agreeing with DB Cooper on everything from what I can tell. So yeah, let's move on to our final segment of this week's episode. And there was some actual boxing over the weekend. We shouldn't discount it. I've already given Terry Harper her props. There was a really good GBM show, which my partner and I watched on TV on Friday night, as well as a Channel 5 show where Charlie Edwards became European champion by beating Thomas Asomba, who, as most people know, is managed by Charlie's brother, Sonny. But the GBM show, especially, I thought was really good. A lot of competitive fights on there. Really enjoyed that on DAZN. Well done to Izzy Azif and all the boxers involved. But I think the fight that got the most attention was one that took place on foreign shores in the USA. Sandy Ryan losing her welterweight world title to Michaela Mayer. Mayer finally getting the good side of a very close and contentious decision in that one. But it wasn't just what happened in the ring that caught the attention. It was what happened to Sandy Ryan before the fight as well. Ayman, you could probably tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, I kind of stumbled upon this after the fact. I woke up and I had a weekend off. I didn't particularly plan to watch Michaela Mayer versus Sandy Ryan. And I'll say this kind of got me to check out the fight, but not for the right reasons. It was a case of Sandy Ryan was going out of a hotel for whatever reason, maybe to go pick something up, some food or something, as she was resting towards fight night. And she got a can of paint thrown at her by a sort of, I guess it was a drive-by kind of situation. And also, there were images shown on her social media of some pictures that were put on posts with the words. I couldn't quite make out the words there, but it was Sandy Ryan is and then of an expletive, which isn't very pleasant, which I've kind of posted around on pylons and things like that across the city. It seemed to be the case, or at least outside a hotel anyway, which isn't quite nice. It's very unsavory, and what could be even more unsavory is, and I don't believe that, and this is being genuine here, I don't believe that Michaela Mayer had anything particularly to do with it, but whether someone else connected to Michaela Mayer or someone along those sort of lines did do something like this, because it's very odd to do this so randomly, and for a fighter high profile on a fight night or for this to, so close to the fight to happen it's very strange. It kind of doesn't quite equate that this is just a random circumstance, a coincidence that happened here. But I don't know that for certain, and I can't make that conclusion. But they say that they've got CCTV footage. They say that they can locate certain things. So if it comes out in the wash, to use an unfortunate pun here with the paint involved, if it comes out in the wash that there was something to do with, or it can be linked back to the team, then that's really not the way to go about a fight night. It's really not kind of the plans. And I know that we've seen other things in the history of boxing, where fighters have jumped off of cars and all sorts of stuff has gone on, but this didn't quite sit right with me. And it's a bit weird as well too, because for this to be part of playing with this a little bit, I'm not saying this is the case, but if this was to be part of the plan, and then you unsettle Sandy Ryan and then you win a razor close decision, did it really work? Like, what was it for? Like, really kind of just a bizarre situation. And I hope this doesn't deter Sandy Ryan from going over America again, because she's kind of really been stiffed a couple of times here now on the scorecards. The first time against McCaskill, and then this happening can really kind of put off a fighter from wanting to go to different territories and ply their craft here. So but with that all said, though, I think maybe it would have been good if someone in a team could kind of, I don't know if this didn't happen, but I hope it did. Just kind of get Sandy focused in that mind, because the fight did slip away from her a little bit here, even though it was close in parts of that fight. And maybe with a bit more experience, she might have kind of been able to put that out of her mind. But I imagine that it seemed like in the interview with Mark Kriegel that she was kind of shaken up by it, and she was kind of thrown off by it. So I completely sympathized with that. So that kind of situation just really didn't sit with me well.
Yeah, it was bang out of order. I don't know how much impact it had on the fight, how it played out, but definitely awful thing to do. And I think the most important thing to remember is, in a sense, it was fortunate that it was paint, albeit it created a big stir and everything. But, it could have been anything. It could have been acid, for example. And, boxers might not be the most famous people in the world, but they are celebrities to an extent, and they are more vulnerable to these sort of attacks. And it's not something you want to see become a pattern. What I would say as well is that you could argue Sandy Ryan lost this fight when it was confirmed to be in the US. And that's not saying the decision was wrong, but whenever a decision's incredibly close, home advantage cannot be discounted as a major factor. This is why Frank Warren has always said and always advocated working really hard to get home advantage for any fight he thinks will be close, and to get home advantage for his fighters. And I think it's the same thing. We've seen Sandy Ryan have that fight, was it with McCaskill, where it seemed very unfair on her and it was ruled a draw. We've seen Michaela Mayer get some decisions against her here in the UK that she probably I'm sure she feels like she should have won. So it just shows how important in tighter fights that home advantage can be. So, Sandy's obviously frustrated at not getting the nod this time around and the stuff that happened in the build-up, but she may want to hope that any rematch with Mayer is secured for the UK, or she knocks her out, obviously, because that takes it out of the judges' hands. Lewis Hart says Sandy Ryan Paintgate is an absolute disgrace. Doubt Mayer had anything to do with it, but defo a crazy fan. Feel sorry for Handy and hope the rematch is installed. James Saucer says Sandy Ryan, Michaela Mayer, not a bad fight with the paint incident. Things got heated. It showed in the fight. I scored it a draw. Stevens doing some boxing social slander, which normally I would have no problem with at all. But Lewis Hart is now getting into it, so I'll let him defend his employer. And DB Cooper one's jumping in as well. Oh no, Lewis Hart wants all the smoke, apparently. Well, you can have it on your channel, mate. Maybe, next when you do Lewis Hart live, which I'm sure will attract a massive audience, that will sort out the low views and enable you to answer your critics. So yeah, everyone's happy. So I felt bad for Sandy Ryan, but I do have a kind of tinge of happiness for Michaela Mayer. She, as I said earlier, has been struggling to get a decision in some of the close fights over here in the UK. And it's hard not to feel like she deserved the rub of the green this time around, albeit, to Sandy's detriment. Nat says GBM show was great. Great win for Ryan Walsh. Yeah, I sent Ryan a voice note congratulating him on his 1-round win over Reese Mould on the GBM show. Life in the old dog yet. What was it? He said 38 is just a number. Easy for you to say, Ryan. I'm 43. But yeah, absolutely delighted. We're going to try and get him on the channel probably tomorrow or Wednesday. Thunder Road says, Danny has a partner in journalism that would be called burying the lead. Listen, we're not going to talk about how often or how successfully I bury the lead, Thunder Road. Please stop asking. Sultan Ibrahimov says, rematch order because the opponent had paint thrown on before by a member of the public is mad, takes away Mayer's victory. I mean, that wouldn't be the only reason. It was a very close fight. We don't know if Sandy would have won if it didn't happen, but we know Mayer did win. MB says, could it be someone with a large bet on the fight? I think it's more likely to be someone who's got some issues psychologically rather than, a kind of over-enthusiastic gambler. But you never know, I suppose. Lewis Hart's telling Stephen he enjoyed him in Prison Break. So they're still going back and forth. We'll let them crack on. But yeah, before we get to the end of the show, we did put out a poll near the start, which seems like ages ago now. I'm sure it's flown by for you guys, though. Anthony Joshua, who should he fight next? The options were 2 rematches, one with Dillian Whyte and one with Daniel Dubois, an immediate rematch, of course, plus Deontay Wilder and Joe Joyce, as there are other names that have been suggested for Anthony Joshua's next fight. Modfather Vinny, if you can hear me, please do share the results of the poll, and we will let you know who or which fight came out on top. Oh, so good he's posted it twice. So a relatively clear winner is the Dubois rematch with 48% of the vote. Deontay Wilder, a fight that's been talked about for many years, second with 30%. Dillian Whyte only 13%, and Joe Joyce a lowly 7% of the vote. I wouldn't say that's what I expected. I thought Wilder might come out on top. I didn't think there was a real hunger for a Dubois rematch because of the conclusive nature of the first fight. Ayman, what do you make of the result?
Lewis ducked the spar as opposed to me not wanting to spar Lewis, but we'll tie a knot in that for the moment. I'm a little bit surprised, to be fair, by this, considering how, in fact, the victory was for Daniel Dubois. But maybe people are thinking along the similar sort of lines. I'm thinking that AJ needs to be matched in tough here, and if it's going to be tough, why not go for the immediate rematch with Daniel Dubois? And AJ, being the warrior that he is, the fighter that he is, like he did with Ruiz, he wanted that one back straight away. So maybe they're thinking on the lines of, look, if you want to prove yourself, go prove yourself by getting the Dubois rematch, as opposed to me shouting something out like Hergovich. In close there, Wilder 30%, which just shows you the interest there that there still is in that Wilder fight, and AJ wanting to have that victory on his record, and Wilder as well, vice versa. So not too surprised with that. A little bit surprised that White is so far down the poll as well too. A couple of almost sympathy votes there for Dylan White and people not really too interested in a rematch. Maybe it's because how decisive that first fight was between them as well. So yeah, like a little bit surprised by that poll, but I guess people want to see the chance at being 3-time.
Yeah, well, all I can think about now is a spar between Lewis Hart and Ayman Khan. Surely it'd have to be some sort of catch weight, wouldn't it? Although, Ayman, you said you're trying to lose a stone. Would that put you into Lewis Hart's weight range?
But I think he probably weighs like 11 and a half.
Yeah, I don't know. He's been hitting the gym pretty hard. He's been trying to, back that back, as George Groves once said. So yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, it's a spar. It doesn't really matter about size differences, does it? Get it on, film it for the channel, film it for both channels if you want. It sounds, from what I've heard of Lewis and Stevens back and forth, that Boxing Social may need a bit of a hand on the views side. So yeah, we're more than happy to share that content, especially if our man comes out on top. And I would back him. 100% to come out on top. Ayman, don't let me down. I've never seen you in action, but
It's this thing called GFC, and there's been 3 or 4 of them now. And we get a group of us. It's myself, Dunner, Danny Gilfillan, Harry Davis, who's now with the UFC, and Jack Fig. And essentially, us idiots have a little bit of a spar, and then Jack Fig pings our heads off for 2 or 3 rounds or whatever.
Was brother Vinny involved in this on one occasion?
Vinny was, yeah. Vinny. I was saying to Vinny the other day, actually, Vinny doesn't know how strong he is. If I said to Vinny, like, hit this pad 100%, like, he'd do it. And if I said to Vinny, hit this pad 60%, he'd hit it the same way. He just doesn't know how to control the power that he has, even though we're trying not to knock each other's heads off here. But yeah, Vinny done well. For a first spar, he done well, and he certainly wasn't the lowest on the totem pole. That distinction goes to, and I'm going to expose him here, a fella by the name of Jonathan Nadja for pro boxing fans, who is better off not lacing the gloves and sticking to being behind the camera.
Just reading Thunder Rhodes obviously got sex on the mind, but he says, all I heard from Ayman is Lewis Hart is 11 and a half. If that is inches, that is a long Corey. How would Ayman know? Thunder Road, mate. Come on, go and have a shower. Have a cold shower. Get a hobby. Appreciate all your help with getting the likes on the channel, but we don't want to go down that route necessarily. Lewis Hart says, need to get it sorted, DB. I mean, yeah, I'm happy to do whatever I can to help. I'll MC it. I'll be the new Dev Sani. I'll ref it if that helps. I've got my 2. I could judge it. I've got my 2 pint glasses ready, like Steve Gray. So yeah, as long as it doesn't involve me getting in the ring and embarrassing all of you, I'm happy to play a role. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. Please do give us a like, subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching on playback rather than on the live, you've missed an incredible live chat. They've really outdone themselves this time. But please do still leave comments and we'll respond to them at a later date. But as is the usual situation at the end of an episode of SO Live, the closing remarks go to a man who's had a superb week already, and it's just about to peak with these closing comments, I'm sure. No pressure, Mr. Ayman Khan.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for joining in your kind comments, whether it's been on or sharing your contributions on Seconds Out Live or on the interviews that we've done here this week, and much more interviews coming up this week as well too. We've got a double header press conference tomorrow in my hometown of Birmingham. I'll be across Liam Davis versus Shabazz Masood, and then running as fast as I can across Birmingham all the way to the Matchroom,
which is pretty fast now.
Yeah, well, my cardio has definitely improved after a time at McCracken's gym. Spencer McCracken is certainly cracking the whip.
Just to butt in, because I did forget to mention this, I'm going to see Jai Opatea tomorrow morning as well at Churchill's gym in London. So I won't be offering to spar. I've not got that Lewis Hart mentality, but yeah, just so you know, that will be coming soon to the channel also. Back to Ayman.
2 champions in action there. Yeah, I'll be there running across Birmingham for the Davis versus Masood one, and then all the way on the other side of Birmingham for Yafai versus Edwards, which promises to be a very good build-up, a very good rivalry between the two that's been brewing for a number of years. And of course, then after tomorrow, all the way up in Liverpool, for Nick Ball defending his crown against Ronnie Rios. So make sure to keep tuned to Seconds Out for all the latest and greatest in boxing interviews and coverage. But for now, we'll leave that for another edition of Seconds Out Live. I've been Ayman Khan, Danny Flexen as well too. And thank you to Vinny, the videographer. We'll see you guys on the next one.